Okay, one piece of advice for living a long, healthy life.
Stay as active as you can, eat healthy, but friends are the most important part of healthy living.
Love that.
Welcome to Your Body, the healthcast that takes a deep dive inside your health. No matter what kind of health issue you're experiencing, whether it's the common cold, a bad case of eczema, heart disease, or breast cancer, it affects you in every way, physically, mentally, emotionally, and internally. This podcast seeks to understand what is going on with our bodies from the inside out, from our heads to our toes, and everything else in between. We're going to look at health issues from every angle and hopefully get a better understanding of what's going on with our bodies and how we can better take care of them. I'm your host, Stephanie Landon, editorial manager at RadNet, a leader in outpatient imaging services and an advocate of patient empowerment for over 35 years.
Look at the glass half full.
There's one thing all of us have in common. We're all aging. We all have a life expectancy. Statistically, that's 81.2 years for women and 76.4 years for men. As they say, mortality is inevitable and youth is fleeting. Or is it? I recently came across an article in Newsweek magazine about something called the health span revolution. This idea was coined by Peter Diamandis, who is a scientist, medical doctor, and a serial entrepreneur who looks at aging more like a disease that can actually be treated, or at least delayed. In the article, he explains that your lifespan is how long you live, how long your body actually remains alive, but your health span is how long you feel healthy, how long you feel vibrant and enjoy your life. He's part of a growing number of billionaires who are pouring money into age reversal investments. For example, Jeff Bezos of Amazon is one of these billionaires, having invested in a company pursuing biological reprogramming technology, whatever that is. Now, for those of us who aren't billionaires, we're still inundated with messaging and advertisements about things we can do to stay youthful: vitamins and creams, exercises, various skin treatments, detox and cleansing potions, diets, and even crossword puzzles. It's all a little overwhelming, isn't it? But while so many people, all these billionaires and scientists, are throwing so much money into age reversal, it makes you wonder, is there really a secret to living a long, healthy, happy life?
For me, it's balance. Work, pleasure, eating, drinking, exercise, balance.
I think the secret is to just stay pickled.
My name is Patrick Alore. I'm a radiologist. My specialty is body imaging. I went to med school at Loyola in Chicago, did my residency at Rush University in Chicago, went to UCSF for my fellowship, which was in abdominal imaging. And when I'm practicing, I'm basically reading imaging studies from, the neck down, or the chest down rather, so the chest, the abdomen, and the pelvis. And I read anything from MRI, CT, and ultrasound.
The first thing I wanted to do was look a little deeper into the specific things people can actually do to live healthier lives. But I realized there probably isn't going to be one blanket recommendation for men and women. Take, for example, a recent study published in the Journal of American College of Cardiology. This study found that women need to exercise only half as much as men to reap the same longevity benefits. It makes sense when you think about it. Women generally have less muscle mass than men, as well as other physiological differences, like differences in the lungs and cardiopulmonary system. And in general, women and men are different anatomically, obviously, and hormonally. There are different social influences on men versus women, and so on. So let's start with some solid advice for men. To do this, I'm speaking with Dr. Patrick Alore, Director of Body Imaging for RadNet's Southern California Division and a member of the RadNet Cancer Imaging team.
I, been reading a lot about men's health, and, it's been sort of a known fact that the life expectancy for men in the US is less than women. And apparently that's increased the differential between the life expectancy between men and women. They say that men now live 5 years less than women. And according to the CDC, in 2022, almost 14% of men in the US were in poor health and 50% of men had hypertension, which is a lot. And that men also, regardless of a disease, they have a higher morbidity rate than women. So there's a lot of stuff with men's health that doesn't sound very good. So what's up with men, do you think?
Well, that's a big bite to I suppose. But men die earlier than women. On average, at an average age earlier. So what is the reason for that? Well, there's hormonal differences and behavioral differences, right? So and kind of overlap. So men have testosterone, women have estrogen, just the hormones and the effect the hormones can have on the organs and the propensity to develop cancers or other diseases is one factor. But also, testosterone is going to lend itself to, more physical activity and more aggressiveness and potentially increased rates of accidents, car accidents, maybe driving, road rage or homicide. And of course, women can have that too, but, hormonal effects cross over into behavioral effects as well. So other behavioral effects that you might think of are the propensity to smoke. More men smoke, more men drink alcohol, more men use drugs, more men do jobs, occupations that are more dangerous.
Right.
An interesting thing is the most morbid, the job in Los Angeles County that is most likely to result in mortality is the people who trim the palm trees, tree trimmers.
Oh.
It's the most dangerous job in LA. And, most of those guys are men. So, but, men tend to do more dangerous things just in general, whether it's, voluntary or occupational or poor decision making. I'm sure we can all think of some examples, but, all of these things lend themselves to decreasing that average age, at which men die sooner than women, for lack of a better way of saying it.
Yeah.
So those are the things that go into that. And those things, especially the smoking, the drug use, the alcohol, can cause an increased rate of the things you mentioned, which are hypertension and heart disease and, other disorders and diseases. So I think that's kind of like the general overview of, men being less healthy than women or dying earlier than women.
I read that the top most common health issues in men are heart disease, diabetes, stroke, and also prostate, lung, and colorectal cancer. And in 2021, actually, cancer was the second leading cause of death in men after heart disease. So let's talk about those things, because those aren't necessarily behavioral. I mean, I guess smoking and alcohol can contribute to those things, but,
Right. So heart disease, disease is not only hormonal related, but also it's very behavioral, right? If you're smoking, if you're not exercising, you're not dieting correctly, or eating fatty foods, those things all lend themselves to heart disease, which can be caused by high cholesterol, high lipids, hypertension, hypertension meaning high blood pressure. So those are the things that lead to heart disease and stroke. And, so those are obviously behavioral.
Right. Right. What about the cancers? Well, lung cancer is,
So lung cancer, again, smoking, liver cancer, cancer, drinking. Right. Smoking and drinking increase all cancers. It's just that, smoking is, more obviously directly related to lung cancer. Yeah. But those two behaviors increase all types of cancers, not just, not just lung cancer or liver cancer. So, and we do screening for all of these things in medicine, right? So when you go to your doctor is supposed to, encourage you to exercise and diet correctly, which we could get into. but they're also supposed to, talk to you about tobacco use. Do you smoke? And then they're supposed to counsel you that you should stop smoking. And how many drinks have you had? And, you should have no more than 14 alcoholic drinks per week and no more than 4 on one sitting. And any more is considered abuse. Right. So,
right.
And most people do abuse it. Most people have occasionally 5, which is considered abuse. And I'm guilty of it too on occasion. But, I think in general, you can, on average, if you're going to a wedding or something and you might have more than 4,
right.
It happens, right?
Right. It's not a regular thing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a regular thing. So over the course of your week, your month, your life, hopefully you're not doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Got it.
So they're supposed to screen you for tobacco, alcohol, drug use, sexually transmitted infections, which can increase the risk for all types of problems, including, death, of course, but also cancers. They're supposed to screen you for depression, for obesity, by evaluating your body mass index, which is a combination of your weight and your height.
Right.
And you can calculate that yourself online if you want to, your BMI, body mass index, to see if you're obese. But, most people have a feeling they're overweight or obese. And then, like I said, diet and physical activity. So they're supposed to, you screen you for this and give you some suggestions on how to fight those problems.
Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of staying healthy, so what are some things that men can do?
So I think diet is probably, the most important thing.
Yeah.
Really. And, the CDC recommends eating fruits, vegetables, whole grains, dairy, and protein. They say, surprisingly, they put dairy in there, but because I know a lot of people don't do dairy, but what they say is the dairy substitutes lack a lot of the vitamins and nutrients necessary to maintain a healthy diet. Mm-hmm. And then that requires people to take supplements, pills and things, which, are not FDA approved and not tested and may or may not be up to grade. So,
right.
They're keeping it simple and saying, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, dairy, and protein. They don't really recommend a specific diet like the Atkins diet or the Mediterranean diet. But when you look at fruits, vegetables, whole grains, dairy, and protein, that's pretty much the Mediterranean diet. So I think if you just kind of overall try to stick to things that look healthy, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, dairy, and things that are not processed.
Right.
So the processed things have refined sugars, which can increase your risk of diabetes and heart disease and stroke. And the processed things have a lot of chemicals, which can increase your risk of cancer. Those chemicals are also hard for your liver to digest, and it can slow or just mess with your metabolism and make it harder for you to metabolize your food, meaning you're gaining weight. So like, I think eating things that look healthy, that are well balanced, that are not processed, and don't have a lot of sugar is probably kind of, if you just stick to those ideas, you're going to be pretty good. So it's kind of gives you better guidelines. But in reality, staying healthy and staying, at the weight you should be, it's a lot about, eating the right total number of calories, right? So if you're supposed to eat 2,000 calories a day to maintain your weight, but you're overweight, then you should eat less than 2,000 calories a day. You should eat 1,900 calories a day or 1,800 calories a day. The only way you'll ever lose weight is to be calorie deficient. So, if you exercise more, you can eat more. If you exercise less, you can eat less. You have to, if you're trying to lose weight, you need to be deficient in calories. And so I just say that because that segues into exercise, right?
Right.
So exercise is going to make it easier for you to be healthy. But either way, you can't just do exercise and expect yourself to be healthy. You also have to eat correctly. Right. So it's a combination of both, but they make each other easier. Yeah. But anyway, the CDC recommends that you get physical activity or exercise, and they recommend 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity, and 2 days of muscle strengthening activity per week. Right. So they also recommend that you should move around more, stand when working, or stand through the day, and not sit all day long. They say that sitting is the new smoking. So like sitting just all day long is just as bad as smoking for your health. And
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, those things are also important. I mean, that's why if anybody has an Apple Watch, it tells you to get up every, 30 minutes or whatever you set it for, but it tells get up. It's that whole, sitting is the new smoking.
Right.
So, I mean, anyway, that all sounds very complicated, but if you just kind of boil it down to go to the doctor, get your screenings, diet, meaning eat a well-balanced diet, stay away from processed foods, and do some exercise. 150 minutes a week is not that bad.
No, it's not.
In my opinion.
Yeah. It's not even just walking, Right. But actually there's two things that I had two thoughts while you were talking. Okay. The first thought is, it amazes me though, how many things can cause cancer, processed foods, sugars, smoking and being overweight, like how all those things can cause cancer. I mean, I find that really crazy.
Everything can cause cancer.
Yeah.
Just think about it. And what else can cause cancer? Being unhappy. People that are unhappy have a higher rate of getting cancer. So what does that tell you? Moderation, right? Like, don't go through your life like eating pieces of iceberg lettuce so you don't get cancer, and probably that can cause it too. But
right.
You also have to balance it with being happy. So hopefully you're doing exercise that makes you happy, whether that's going for a walk or a hike or whatever it happens to be. Mm-hmm. And you're eating foods that you find delicious. Hopefully they're some interesting preparation of your favorite vegetable, or if it's going to be dairy, hopefully it's a good cheese rather than just ice cream all day long.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
But,
yeah.
You have everything in moderation. You have to be happy because,
Yeah. You still have to enjoy life. Right. And eating is a pleasure. Okay. So the other thought that I want to get into is, you talked about going to the doctor and the doctor doing screening. So there are so many studies and statistics that have shown that men are less likely to even see a doctor than women. So that in and of itself is problematic, right?
Right. That is right. And, I don't know to that. I'm sure that there's some assumptions about it if you Google the question. Right off the bat, I would say that, men, if I'm thinking it from my, biased perspective as a man, I would say that some of our problems are more indolent, when you talk about colorectal cancer screening, a man's not going to notice a bump or a polyp in their colon necessarily, but a woman would notice a bump or lump in her breast, right?
Sure.
So maybe women are more prompted to go to the doctor because they have more regular checkups scheduled for various things that are GYN related or childbearing related, or things that are more helpable, like a breast lump. But I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Right.
I do know that 12% of men greater than 18 years of age rate their overall health as fair or poor, and 12% of men less than 65 years of age do not have health insurance.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
So, it's, I don't know what that data is for women, but.
Yeah. Well, I know on a past episode, we talked about, men and seeing doctors. And I think there's a whole, litany of reasons that, people have surmised why men are more hesitant to see doctors. A lot of it, being various, societal issues about, not being masculine or, whatever, like all kinds of things that, make them not want to see a doctor, or being afraid of not being well, or, things like that. But I just think there's, I guess talking about things like this is a way that, we have to get men to pay more attention to their health. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Right. To change these statistics. So with that regard, let's talk about screenings, which is what you do. So what are essential screenings for men, and who should have them, and when, and for what?
Yeah, so we can go through them.
Yeah.
And just, a screening means that a person is not symptomatic, right?
Okay.
That means they come in, they got no complaints.
Right.
That's what a screening is.
Right.
If somebody has a cough or they're coughing up blood and you get a chest CT, that's not a screening.
Yeah.
That's a doc. The patient's got a problem. A screening is done on somebody who doesn't have any problems, but they have risk factors for problems. In other words, they're a smoker, but they come in for their regular checkup and you're like, oh, you're a smoker. We should screen you for lung cancer, which I can get to. Maybe that's what we should do, but I can go through some of the screening.
Yeah.
So some of them, but some of them are pretty obvious. So, screening about healthy lifestyle habits, including the smoking cessation we talked about, the alcohol intake we talked about, receiving appropriate immunizations. So whether the flu or, the pneumovax when you get older, or COVID, whatever that is, screening for HIV.
Okay.
That should be done for all men. Screening for hypertension. So every time, man or woman, you go to the doctor, they take your blood pressure, hopefully.
Yeah.
So that's a screening exam for cardiac disease, because hypertension can cause everything: vascular disease, kidney disease, stroke, cardiac disease. So it's hypertension. Okay. Diabetes. Men 40 to 70 years of age who are overweight or obese should be screened for diabetes. So you test their blood sugar, or another thing in their blood called their hemoglobin A1C, which basically tells you how high their blood sugar has been over the course of time rather than just right now.
Okay.
Diabetes is a disease that can cause also a slew of other things, including heart disease and stroke and kidney disease. So it's important to screen for that. Dyslipidemia, high cholesterol, high lipids, that's what that is. So men should be screened for that from 40 to 75 years of age. That's a blood test. Prostate cancer is recommended for screening in some men, but it's kind of a soft recommendation based on, the risk factors for the patient, a discussion between the patient and their doctor. And that's typically a blood test. Occasionally it's a digital rectal examination, and if needed, they can get a prostate MRI.
Right.
That would be rare for, screening, but it can happen. Colorectal cancer screening, which you had mentioned a few times. So that's for men 50 to 75 years of age. The screening is recommended via testing the blood or testing the stool for blood, because colon cancers will oftentimes bleed.
Right.
You get a colonoscopy, which is the camera that images, directly looks at the colon and looks for cancers or polyps, and also computed tomography colonography. So a CT colonography, which is something that we do in radiology, where you get a CT scan and you try to look for colon polyps. So those are some things. And then, before I get into lung cancer screening, if you want to ask me any questions about any of those.
No.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
So lung cancer screening is probably the more pertinent one for radiology for what I do, because it's going to be the one that is most commonly recommended. If colorectal cancer screening, probably it's more common that the patient will get a colonoscopy rather than a CT scan. So we don't do as many of those, but lung cancer screening, with low dose CT scans of the chest, we do a lot of. So, I think that's probably the most important thing for me to talk about. So for patients that are between 55 and 80 years of age, who have at least a 30-pack year smoking history and currently smoke, or who have quit within the past 15 years, they should get the low dose CT scan of the chest to look for early lung cancer. So what is meant by 30-pack year smoking history? So if a patient has smoked 1 pack a day for 30 years, they qualify. Or a patient smoked 2 packs a day for 15 years, they qualify. So those are the kind of patients who should be screened. Now, if you're a patient who's 50 years old and you're like, man, I've been smoking since I'm 13, on and off, and, I don't really qualify, but, I want to get this anyway, then you can get it. I don't know if your insurance is going to pay for it, but with me, I would get it. So, So what we do is we scan the patient with a CT scan. It has a lower radiation dose in this particular CT scan than other CT scans. And we look for lung nodules, which are basically little, for lack of a better word, for layman's terms, a bump in the lung. And it could be indicative of an early lung cancer. Sometimes those bumps are benign, sometimes they're not. But what we do is we look at them, and if they have certain characteristics or a size, we suggest that they might be or might not be lung cancer, and we either go further with the testing or we recommend the patient return in a certain amount of time for follow-up to see if that's changed or if there are any new lung nodules. So
got it.
That allows the patient to catch their cancer early and get the appropriate treatment so it doesn't grow and become harder to take out or get to a point where the chemotherapy or radiation won't be effective.
Right. And lung cancer is still one of the leading causes of death for men and women. I mean, it's quite significant.
We do it for men and women, but it is, I think, probably the most significant test in radiology that has come out in the past, or come up in the past 5 years. I mean, we've been doing it for a while, but the number of scans that we're seeing in patients that are complying with the recommendations and the follow-up is increasing greatly. And the number of cancers we're finding is increasing greatly because so many patients are getting screened. So,
well, that's great, actually.
It's been a great thing, yeah.
That's
definitely, it's for men and for women, but I feel like, women had mammography and men didn't have that. Now men kind of can participate in that screening process. And
I mean, so women have, we have regular mammograms, but there isn't really a regular, I mean, I guess maybe having their prostate checked. I mean, there isn't really a regular screening for men the same way.
No. No.
Yeah. I guess aside from, maybe getting their prostate checked if they need to. But that's interesting. It seems like there should be.
Yeah, right.
And prostate cancer is very prevalent also, especially as men get older.
Right. But more men have prostate cancer. More men die with prostate cancer than die of cancer. I don't know if you ever heard that. So prostate cancer can be basically you can have prostate cancer, not know it, and die of something else later.
So I've been reading a lot of studies about cancer in younger adults, such as colon and rectal cancers. So what do you think about that?
Well, the population is increasing, and the population that we're screening and that has access to healthcare is increasing. So, perhaps part of it is from that, but I'm sure, the scientists and epidemiologists out there have considered that. And, if they're still saying that they're seeing more in younger patients, then I'm going to have to believe them. And I don't know that they have the answer for that exactly. I'm sure they have theories. I don't have the answer for that. I mean, I can give some, maybe it's from this, maybe it's from that, but I don't really know. And I don't haven't really science behind it. But, we all talk about environmental pollution, whether it's in our air, in our water, in our food, the processed, the processed foods and the chemicals in our foods, or the, herbicides and pesticides in our foods. And, all of those things can cause cancer. So, as that increases in our environment, are we seeing those cancers earlier? Because, maybe 25 years ago, there wasn't as much of that, and people got cancers more naturally as they aged, as their DNA did, and, and maybe now, people as infants and children, or even in the womb, are exposed to these chemicals, and it's causing issues with our DNA, leading to cancer at a younger age. And, just like when, well, I guess maybe this is a little too in-depth, but younger people, infants and children, are usually more susceptible to things that are damaging to our cells, like radiation or chemicals. mutagens, but they're more sensitive to that than older people.
Right.
Why is that? Is when you're younger, you're still growing. Your cells are still dividing at a very high rate because you're growing, and your DNA is replicating because your cells are dividing, because you're growing. And when your DNA is dividing so that you can replicate and grow, that's the most sensitive time for the DNA to be injured, for lack of a better word, to be mutated, to be injured by chemicals, radiation, pollutants in our environment. So if we're exposed to those more frequently at a younger age now, then you're going to see cancers at a younger age.
Wow.
So really that's, but you know, I'm not a geneticist or, you know, an environmentalist or an epidemiologist, you know, by trade. So I probably should, you know,
yeah, but
that out there.
But I think that's a great theory. It makes a lot of sense too. It really does.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's say we live in this world with these environmental factors, and you're a young person and you're, you know, by all standards too young to get a colonoscopy or have your prostate checked. What would be your recommendation for that person?
Well, it's still so rare. Those cancers and things are still so rare in those age groups that that's why the screening is, you know, the screening is recommended for the age groups that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
For those adults, you know, of those certain ages, because it still is very, very rare for anyone younger. So there's really nothing that they can do. And, you know, I would say like, oh, well, you can vote for people who, you know, vote for politicians who encourage better environmental practices and, you know, making sure there's no food in our food. But if you're 5 years old, you can't vote anyway. So.
Right.
Just hope your parents keep food and keep you out of aren't blowing smoke in your face. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know the answer.
Yeah. It's a big, complicated issue, I guess.
Right.
But, so, okay. All right. So put that aside. In general, we've talked about diet, exercise, screening. So what would just be one big piece of advice you would give to men to take care and pay attention to their health?
Diet, exercise, and go to your doctor.
See your doctor. Yeah.
Yes. And if you're curious about what you should be screened for, you can go on the internet and basically ask the question, I am 40 years old, what should I be screened for? Or you can go to the USPSTF guidelines. I know that's a mouthful, but the USPSTF guidelines, which is the United States Preventative Services Task Force. And it will tell you, you know, what people should be screened for, essentially. Although that's kind of a lot, but just go to your doctor.
While women in general tend to live longer than men, they still have their own health risks that are quite significant. For example, compared to men, women are more likely to be susceptible to hypertension, diabetes, arthritis, fibromyalgia, eye diseases, irritable bowel syndrome, and certain types of mood disorders. Cardiac problems are more common in men, but women actually die more from them. What's more, symptoms for many health problems in women differ from those of men, and as such, often go unrecognized or unnoticed. For instance, it's fairly common knowledge that in men, the signs for a heart attack are often tightening of the chest and pain that spreads down the left arm. But in women, symptoms of a heart attack can include gastrointestinal upsets, feeling overwhelming fatigue, or having a fast heartbeat. And for many women, these symptoms sound a lot like any given weekday.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Bhavana Pathak. I'm a hematologist and oncologist that specializes in breast cancer, and I'm also a certified yoga teacher.
I sat down next with Dr. Bhavana Pathak in our podcast studio in Long Beach, California, to talk to her a bit about what women specifically can do to live healthier lives. Dr. Pathak is a breast oncologist at the MemorialCare Cancer Institute at Breastlink in Orange County, California. and much of her studies focus on wellness and resilience. She implements into her practice something called integrative oncology, which is a patient-centered form of cancer care that utilizes mind and body practices, lifestyle modifications, and natural or holistic products combined with conventional cancer treatments. All of this, combined with her experience as a yoga instructor, provided some really interesting guidance.
I was surprised to read that cardiac or heart attack is a number one killer of women. Because you sort of think of men more associated with that. And I guess that men have more heart attacks, but more women die of heart attacks.
Yeah.
So I would think that something like, yoga or a way to relieve stress would be beneficial to women.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. It is in some ways surprising. And it's surprising that it's surprising to many, because I think a lot of women's issues often, we don't tend to understand it as much. We don't tend to sort of even treat it in the same way,
right,
with the same gravity. That's one of the reasons I really enjoy being a breast oncologist, although I do get my share of occasional male patients with breast cancer. It is predominantly a field devoted to women. Cardiac disease is unfortunately the number one killer. Now, cancer is not far behind, but cardiac disease, we get the sense, unlike cancer, which we'll debate because there's different ways to prevent it now, we know. But in some ways we think that, cardiac disease could be preventable. And in the ways in which we can prevent it, we try to, like you're suggesting, like if you do yoga or stress relieving things, like, these things that can help reduce your, inflammatory response, these are all important.
Right. Yeah, I think that something like, because I think a lot of women's health issues, the symptoms are subtle, or I feel like also women are so adept or used to kind of brushing things off. It's very normal for a woman to have a weird pain here or an ache there, and you just kind of like brush it off without really thinking it could be anything.
Women are usually the first ones to mobilize to help someone else.
And I think on the individual side of it, I think just being aware of your body and like knowing when something's not right. So, all right. So let's talk a little bit more about women's health in general. So what are some things women can do to live healthy lives?
Well, some of the things women can do to lead a healthy life, I think, start first with the idea of taking care of themselves and self-care. It's like they say when you go on an airplane, put your own oxygen mask first before you put it on others. This is a lesson I'm still trying to imbibe and learn myself. So with that principle in mind, a lot of things fall into place, whether it's talking about the specifics of screening and things, which I can rattle off to you, which I'm happy to do.
We'll get to that.
But I think one of the best things people can do, a woman can do, is to cultivate some kind of mindfulness practice. And that is because mindfulness is the idea of cultivating awareness, but cultivating awareness about what is within you, Because I think women have a very huge, tremendous power. In the Indian tradition, we call it Shakti. That is the sort of divine feminine form. And we have this huge intuition, and we need to tap into that more. It can guide us to answers that we don't know in the current state. And in order to do that, you need to be aware and not be bogged down by the stresses of life, caffeine, this or that, and that's why these practices, whether it's yoga or meditation or Tai Chi or art or music, things that are not so on the beaten path of what society tells us we need to do from 9 to 5. So carving out that time, whether it's 5 minutes, 2 minutes. You're a mom as well, right? So how hard it is, and to find even 2 minutes of time. But even if it's in the bathroom while the kids, locked bathroom, while the kids are knocking, saying, "Mom," just to take a step back to do that first. And then I think certainly from a clinical perspective, we know that regular exercise is like the best medicine.
Yeah.
It's an antidepressant, it's a cardiac medicine, it's your aspirin, it's your so many other drugs in one.
Right.
And it's because, again, the magic of the body doing all of its metabolic effects. And it's not just limited to just losing weight, but just the act of exercising 30 minutes a day. And if it's not 30, break it down into 5, 10. Learning about what types of exercise can be helpful.
Right.
You know, in so many parts of the world, periods are a shame. People put into houses and put there for days. And it's easy for us to judge because we're like, oh, how would you do that to a woman?
Right.
But when you come from the perspective of like, they had their own way of doing things for years and hundreds of years and thousands of years. And then, but when you take that individual who may now be here, or if it's not in Nepal, like where I'm from, but it could be Kansas. Right. You know, somebody may have had a certain type of upbringing that gave them certain health. And so we almost inherit, and maybe you can understand, like we almost inherit just as much as we inherit genetic material, you know, predispositions to cancers or whatever. We also inherit a living sort of inheritance of our health and health knowledge that we can change.
You know, that's a really good point, actually. That's a really good point. Like when we, you know, talk about risk factors. Yes, that's a really, really good point. Like we talk about risk factors and modifiable and non-modifiable. Your attitude should be listed as a modifiable risk factor.
Totally.
That's really, really interesting. So as we were saying, breast cancer is a very, you know, common issue for women.
Yeah. 1 in 8.
1 in 8.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about breast cancer.
Yeah.
And why is it so predominant? I mean, what you know, why 1 in 8?
That's a good question, Stephanie. And if I had the answer, I would be very rich. But I think there are some certain known factors that lead to breast cancer. And then there are some modifiable risk factors. Okay. And so it's sort of a spectrum. And so some of the things we can't change, going from one end non-modifiable to the modifiable, include being a woman, being female. We can't change that usually, and we are more predisposed to developing. Your age, okay? As you get older, you're at higher risk for developing breast cancer. And the way I explain it to my patients is that, you know, our bodies, when we're younger, we have this really beautiful immune system that's sort of like the surveillance cops going around getting rid of cancer cells, bad guys, etc. And just like your bones, just like your kidneys and your heart, everything gets kind of weaker over time, and we're less able to patrol these cancer cells that emerge. So that's another reason why, you know, age, but it's also one of the rationales behind screening, which, you know, I know we'll get to, but specific, you know, age points at which we might want to do that, where the benefit of screening becomes way more than the risks of screening. Okay? Then other risk factors kind of emerge from non-modifiable to modifiable. So things such as your genetic history, so your family, right? Did you have a mother with breast cancer? Did you have a grandmother? Did you have a cousin? But I think the biggest fallacy I hear from people is like, I knew nobody with breast cancer in my family. But remember, maybe your lifestyle changed. Maybe you came to this country. Maybe, you know, there are a lot of different reasons why it's emerging more nowadays. And, you know, we can tap on that as well. But, you know, some of it could be the chemical exposures we have. Some of it could be the stress. Some of it could be the type of sleep we were getting, certainly diet, lack of exercise, all those things. But then, you know, again, like the other choices we make. So birth control use can lead to a higher risk of breast cancer after a certain amount of years. Hormone replacement use, specifically after at least, you know, 5 years, can lead to increased risk for breast cancer. Having children early or having children late can also, or having no children at all, can lead to higher risk for breast cancer. So these are all choices we make, you know, darn you women making these choices. I know. You know, this is part of our, you know, just something that can happen to us, regardless of the choices we make in life. But essentially having a longer period of literally having periods like an early menarche, having your period early, and then having a late menopause, that window of time, having a longer length of that can increase your risk for breast cancer.
Because the more hormones.
Yeah, exactly. And then having no kids or having many kids can be a risk factor. And then turning into sort of the more modifiable things like, okay, did you ever have a history of chest radiation? Right. Well, that can potentially, thoracic radiation. Sometimes people have like a lymphoma in their history, and then, now, does the benefit outweigh the risk at that time? Certainly. And we have ways to prevent breast cancer. So I'm not saying, don't get the radiation, but it's just something to know and be aware of. Right. And then other things. I think the biggest modifiable risk factor, hands down, is obesity. Okay. So obesity is a huge factor in the recurrence risk and incidence of breast cancer, and across a lot of other cancer types. Yeah. We now know that fat tissue, or what we medically call adipose tissue, is active. It is not just like a passive, pudgy standbyer. Okay. Right. It's just active tissue. It sends inflammatory signals, and it does a whole bunch of things in your body, especially visceral fat, which is surrounded around the abdomen, that can unfortunately lead to increased incidence of cancer. So that is one of the reasons why, as a society and, with my patients, we really hone in on exercise, especially before, during, and after a cancer diagnosis. And even now, there was a study out of the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium. It's like our premier breast cancer conference annually, that said that women with metastatic breast cancer, meaning stage 4, it is sort of not in the curative setting, even metastatic breast cancer can benefit from exercise. Oh, wow. And so we know that obesity is a problem, but like exercise can be a really low resource, like available solution to that.
Yeah. So interesting. Yeah. And there's also smoking.
Yes. Smoking. Let's not forget. Yes.
Right. That's sort of one of those for every kind of cancer too.
Definitely true.
Interesting. So let's talk about screenings.
Yeah.
So when does a woman want to start screening for breast cancer?
So this is a hot debate topic. And to kind of set the tone, in our society, we have various different societies. American Cancer Society, the USPSTF. Yeah, these are the United States Preventive Task Force. And American Cancer Society, there's all the different types of societies that have put out guidelines. And it used to be that women, 55 and above, or 55 to 70 should get screening. However, recently, that age has been brought down. Yeah. From, in your 50s to now 45, and actually 40. Yeah, 40. Yeah, so 40. And so sometimes it's hard to give a discrete number because in reality, it should be a conversation between the patient and the doctor. At 40, they say you should consider having a mammogram annually. Okay. And I would say that if you have a family history of someone having breast cancer, especially early, you should probably start having breast screenings at least 10 years before that. Sure. And then I'd also add to that, if you have a genetic susceptibility, meaning you've been tested and you have a gene, like a BRCA gene or whatnot, you may need to start testing even sooner than that, in your 20s, with different types of tests, such as MRIs and things like that. Yeah. So I would suggest 40 annually. Right. 45 for sure. Yeah. And then I strongly feel that we should continue screening as long as a woman has a good quality of life. Right. I think there's a little bit of ageism and at times saying that, we should stop at a certain number, but age is just a number. Okay. So what about, let's shift now to older women, like post-menopause. What are some things they can do to be healthier? Yes. So I think, again, the first and foremost thing is probably exercise, because after menopause, women tend to gain some weight, and it can be hard, as we know. Getting rid of the menopause belly is something we always hear from some of our older patients. And so exercise is I think one of the biggest things. Also recognizing when it's that you are still, at risk for breast cancer. I've had a number of patients tell me, I went through menopause. How can I be making estrogen anymore?
Right.
Well, the dirty truth is that there's estrogen that's produced from your adipose tissue. The adipose or fat tissue produces estrogen.
Oh.
Yeah. And so do your adrenal glands, et cetera. So the more fat you have on your body, the higher risk you are, unfortunately, for developing breast cancer.
Interesting.
And so it's this like little loop.
Uh-huh.
Not good.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. So what about, let's step outside cancer for a second and talk about, let's put that away for a minute. Let's talk about some other screening
Sure.
that women should be, sort of militant about getting for their health.
Yeah. So I'd say from head to toe, in certain populations, like a Caucasian population or anyone with a family history of melanoma or skin cancers, seeing a dermatologist for complete skin exam.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what we know, especially screening tools are important if they can make a difference in your life, right? So you don't just screen for like the rarest of tumors because we know it's so rare.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the cancers that occur most commonly. So we're talking about, when you talk about disease and death, we saw cardiac disease, and then cancers fall next as something that can be prevented. And so colorectal cancer is another huge thing.
Yeah.
And you made a comment earlier about how, the incidence is increasing and increasing in younger people.
Yeah.
And that is definitely true. We don't know quite what it is. And it's not just that we're just detecting it more.
Right.
So colorectal cancer is just like breast cancer. It's important to detect early because the earlier you detect it, the likelihood of cure just is exponential.
Right.
Okay. Right. Stage 1, stage 2. You're looking at life expectancies that feel normal, just as in breast cancer.
Right. And they did drop that age also down to 45.
So correct. So that was what I was going to say is that just like breast cancer screening, 45 is the new number for getting your screening colonoscopy. And so I know that might be scary for some women, but I've had 2 in my life already. And so it's just one of those things. And I share that because I think it's important to have some transparency.
Yeah.
To know that like your health professionals, they're just humans and we're all in the same boat trying. Right. So getting your colonoscopy is another step you can take. And if you're afraid of doing that, although that's technically the gold standard, there are other modalities you can use. You can ask your doctor about. There are now stool tests that look for cancer DNA. If it does test positive, you may need to do a colonoscopy anyway, but that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I guess there's also, blood pressure and,
Yes. In terms of what can you do? Have a primary care doctor, check your blood pressures. You may find out like a hemoglobin A1C is a test that can look to see what is your... It can be a test to see your risk for diabetes, but essentially your glucose control over the course of 3 months. So they may test for that, see if you're at risk for that. A number of other things. But another thing that is commonly done in primary care practices or gynecologic practices is a pap smear.
Right.
And so, that is done. The pap smear is named after a man, Papa Nicolau, the doctor or scientist that created the test. It's short for, pap smear.
Lucky him.
Right. And so, that recommendation has also evolved over time. But generally, anyone 21 and above every 3 years, especially if you've been sexually active. Yeah. You don't need to get before 21, but roughly every 3 years. Yeah. In your 30s, that cadence and even the type of test, you may not necessarily need a PAP per se, but that can potentially change. Right. And then the age limit on that can extend again. There's a kind of a discussion that can occur, but a cap I've heard is like 65. Okay. But again, those caps and these guidelines are very fluid. If you have a history of immunosuppression, HIV, family history of cervical cancer, personal history of cervical cancer, and also exposure to a drug called DES. Well, back, a couple decades ago, there was a medicine given to moms with morning sickness that unfortunately led to an increased risk of cervical cancers and gynecologic cancers.
Some of those tests look for HPV also, right?
Yes, yes. So HPV is the other thing women can do. Well, it's unfortunately, it's maybe something the younger women, our daughters, right?
Yeah.
So our daughters, there is a vaccine against the HPV virus, which does not only cause, we know, not only causes cervical cancer, but can cause other cancers, head and neck cancer.
Yeah.
And so kind of killing two birds with one stone. But the vaccination, that type of prevention currently is limited to more of the pediatric.
Right. So hopefully our kids won't have to worry about it. But I read this interesting article that talked about that societal factors affect women's health.
Yeah.
And, like things like depression, like women are more susceptible to depression and, things like that. What do you want to say about it?
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking.
Yeah.
I mean,
we're sort of
as a breast oncologist and a yoga teacher, I see it firsthand.
Yeah.
The impact that certain decisions and policies have on women working a 9-to-5 job or 8-to-5 or 7-to-5 and coming home and resuming domestic responsibilities. We need, like other developed countries like France or Canada, have a system in place for caretaking. And like my mother is a daycare provider, like have a far more robust system so that women can be at work, can have their biology not be a detriment.
Right.
And then continue to take part in the unique things we need to do throughout our lifespan. To take care of our health.
Yeah, that's interesting. And, it's interesting because also on a lot of other episodes that we've done, we have touched on a sort of mind-body connection and, where your mind is, when you're suffering or, dealing with something, it really affects how your body is going to respond.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Definitely. And I think the science of yoga, which is the word yoga is from the word, is a Sanskrit word coming from the word yuj, which is a union or uniting the mind and the body is one of the simplest ways to look at it.
Yeah.
And the reason that's important is because there's this concept that the body keeps the score.
Okay.
And so things that we consciously do, we can perceive, like if you break your arm, you've broken your arm.
Right.
But oftentimes there are traumas, micro traumas, and may not feel like something traumatic, like you didn't have an earthquake happen or you didn't, go through a divorce, but it might be something else. Sometimes it may just be like a cancer diagnosis or hearing the news that you have a lump in your breast from a radiologist, right? Those types of encounters and experiences get stored in your body. And for better or worse, it's upon us to work through that.
Yeah.
And yoga is just one avenue. I think there's a whole menu of things you can do, but it's certainly a science.
Right.
And it's not just the postures, actually.
Right. That's what I was going to ask you next. Like, what is it about yoga? Because, you do the postures, you do the stretching. Child's pose is my personal favorite.
And so, part of why I wanted to embark on training in yoga was, one, to acknowledge my ancestors and this sort of incredible wealth of knowledge they unearthed at some point, 5,000 years ago. Yeah. But that's still applicable today, But also it's essentially a way, it's a vehicle to get in touch with yourself and have what they call communion with sort of the universe, which and many people can get afraid of yoga. They feel like, okay, it's like this foreign language. Maybe it's the occult. Maybe it's religious. And, I'm here to dispel all of that. Right. It's essentially just a method it's like a scientific method. It's a way to ask yourself questions. And medically speaking, it connects your parasympathetic nervous system when you take a big inhale, expand your diaphragm, and when you exhale, to your sympathetic nervous system. And the system, the parasympathetic is what controls rest and digest, your ability to relax. And the sympathetic is your fight and flight. And that is the most critical interface between the two. It's the only thing you have voluntary control over is your breath and also involuntary. Yeah. So Anyway,
That's
so
interesting.
Yeah, it's very important to use the breath, and then moving into more formalized breath work with pranayama. Then there's the next phase. There are 8 steps, and then the next phase is dharana, or sort of withdrawal of the senses. And so that's the idea of sort of kind of centering yourself more.
Right.
The phase beyond that is called dhyana, or meditation. And so a lot of the ancient sages said a lot of the point of doing yoga is to get into a meditative state.
Right.
And that meditation, ultimately, which is cultivation of awareness, you don't have to sit in a boring room and count sheep or like whatever you think it is. There are thousands of types of meditation.
Yeah.
The point is to cultivate awareness. And then from there, the last phase, and I say phase because it's constantly an evolution. There's no ultimate peak you can achieve within yoga. But the last phase is what we call samadhi, or connecting to the universe. Okay. And when you do that in different ways, like when you go out to walk in nature, when you hug your child, you feel this like ebullient sense of bliss. And that's why we get to varying stages of that samadhi, like every day, but also specifically when you do these practices.
We seem to always come back to the mind-body connection on this podcast, and that may not be without good reason. A study published last year by researchers at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis revealed that a physical connection between the body and the mind is actually built into the structure of the brain. The study showed that parts of the brain area that control movement are plugged into networks involved in thinking and planning, and are in control of involuntary bodily functions, such as blood pressure and heart rate. When you think about how much blood pressure and heart rate, just as examples, can affect our health overall, the implications of this connection seem really significant. In talking to Dr. Pathak about yoga specifically, I got to thinking more about this connection. So while we got some great advice as to what we can do to keep our physical bodies healthy, I think it would be worthwhile to also look at what we can do for our health spans. This is the idea we talked about at the beginning of the episode. Whereas our lifespans may determine how long we remain alive, our health spans are the extent to which we feel healthy and vibrant and enjoy our lives. And as compared to our lifespans, we may actually be able to control our health spans. So how can we make the best of this mind-body connection to get the most out of our health spans? We're going to get into this in the second part of this episode on how to live your best life.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed our podcast, please be sure to download Your Body Show for more great content and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to learn more, visit yourbodyshow.com or check out our social pages on Instagram and Facebook. Search for RadNet California. Your Body is produced by Steve Kramer, Doug Smith, and me, Stephanie Landon. Joseph Wilson is head of technical production. Executive produced by Paul Colacchio and Karen Morad, all on behalf of RadNet. Original theme music by Mark Lakier. We hope you've enjoyed our HealthCast. Find us wherever you download podcasts.